Okay, let's start. Hello everyone. Welcome to BritCham Indonesia webinar series in Human Capital to CULL or to nurture your human assets. I'm a events coordinator at the British Chamber of Commerce in Indonesia. Today's webinar is proudly in partnership with Global Indonesian Professionals Association and our corporate member, Korn Ferry Indonesia. This session will be moderated by Chris Ren, our Executive Director, and I would also like to introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is Sylvano Damanik. He is the Vice Chairman of Korn Ferry Indonesia. And our second panelist is Stephen Marcelino. He is the ASEAN Capital Market Lead of Accenture UK and also Chairman of Global Indonesian Professionals Association. Before we start, allow me to review the functionality of this Zoom webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded and we will share the link with you when it's available after the event is complete. All dial-in participants will be muted to avoid background noises that may distract you from listening to the webinar and also to enable our panelists to present without interruption. And we have also activated the Q&A box. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the box at any time. It is at the bottom center of your screen, and we will have time for Q&A session at the end to answer your questions. Now, without further ado, I'm going to hand the floor over to Chris Ren, who is going to start today's webinar. Chris, please.
Thank you very much for that welcome and introduction, Asti. A very good day to everybody, wherever you are in the world. I suppose it's approaching late afternoon in Indonesia. Personally, I am working from family home, which is Liverpool in England. One of our speakers, Stephen Marcelino, is based in London currently, and Sylvano is in Jakarta. I won't go through introductions to the two speakers because you will have read their bios when you registered, except to say that Sylvano has more than 20 years of experience on the organizational side relating to leadership, talent management, and reward practices. Stephen joins us today, and by the way, it was his birthday earlier in the week, so happy birthday from everyone at BritCham, Stephen. Stephen joins us wearing two hats. He wears the hat of his position as ASEAN Capital Market Lead of Accenture UK, but also as former very, very recently moved on Executive Director of the Young Indonesian Professionals Association, with whom BritCham has a very deeply embedded relationship for the benefit of both graduating Indonesian talent and also our corporate premier members, but now currently is chair of the Global Indonesian Professionals Association, GIPA. So we'll be talking to Stephen and asking him to move from one hat to the other. As far as today's proceedings are concerned, Sylvano, assisted by his team member Amanda, will run through a few selected slides from a survey that they did very, very recently, homing in on the human resource capital elements. After that, Stephen will respond, and then we'll try to move things along, introducing the different questions that have already been submitted to us and new questions that come during the course of this presentation in the rather more or rather less formal conversational chat show style. From our side, we noticed that there are a number of non-members with us on this particular webinar. Welcome to you, and of course, welcome to our members as well. I would like now to simply take the opportunity to pass over the baton to Sylvano, who will be looking at a whole range of human resource, human capital issues, in particular contextualizing those issues to the current pandemic that we are all experiencing, and addressing really a question that is being raised by a number of our members to both our board and to myself, and that is, what are you doing with your teams? From a cash flow issue, what should we be doing? From a talent issue, what should we be doing? From a loyalty issue, what should we be doing? With that, Sylvano Damanik, Vice Chairman of Korn Ferry Indonesia, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. And happy birthday, Stephen. Chris, the theme or the topic that you put out was very provoking, because either you cull or nurture your talent. And so that's really the question between the ideal and the reality that we are facing today. We're going to share some quick survey that we did in the period of 2 weeks before March 15. And there are some other thoughts that we would like to share. So there are some parts where we think it's based on the client's feedback that came through us, and also our thinking of what companies can do or should do in this time. So, Buati, if you don't mind going to the next slide, please, and I'll hand this over to Amanda to explain the result of the survey.
Thank you, Pak Sylvano. Thank you for BritCham for inviting us today. So to start off, as mentioned by Pak Sylvano, Korn Ferry conducted a flash survey back in early March of 2020. We wanted to gain insights on the potential impact of the pandemic to both business and human capital management. So on the business side, at that time, more than 80% of the respondents believe that their business would be impacted by the pandemic. Around 37% think it will be around 15 to 30% decline, and 15% believe that it will be more than 30%. Next slide. Okay, thank you. On the human capital aspect, we also asked the participants to identify potential adjustment that they were planning to make based on 6 main categories. But at the time of the survey was taken, the impact of the pandemic was still quite mild, I would say, at that time. And most organizations did not have clear guidelines from the government on setting up new working arrangements. So the data indicated adjustment priority at that time was on employee value construction, or mostly on how to set up a flexibility working arrangement, on who to work from home, on who to work at the office. But at this point of time, I believe that there are a clearer guideline from the government. So I'm not gonna talk so much on the employee value construction, but let me share on the other adjustment from the other aspects. So first of all, on the rewards and benefits, we found there are 3 main initiatives. First is to implement ad hoc daily allowance policies for those daily employees, so that they do not need to worry about their welfare even if they could not come to work due to the COVID situation. And then on the second one, some organizations are implementing ad hoc variable pay policies. For those companies who are focusing on cost management, they opt for variable pay deferrals, so they don't have to pay it on time. And on some other organizations who are very much concerned on revenue, they decided to alter their sales compensation scheme to keep employees motivated, to keep the productivity, and so on. And on the third initiatives, we see some companies implement ad hoc incentive to those employees who cannot work from home, such as factory workers or transportation system operators, so that they can get motivated even in this kind of condition where they still have to come to work while the others can work from home. On employee training and development, the adjustment is focused on shifting the training to online platform. On career development and talent management, we see that several organizations indicated that they are postponing promotions and rotation program for this year. And then on performance management, adjustments are focused on either revising the performance targets to align with current condition so that employees would not be demotivated. And the second one is on changing the performance KPIs to align with new strategy that organizations have to make to survive the pandemic. Lastly, on recruitment and workforce size, some organizations are badly impacted by the pandemic are opting for resizing as part of the cost optimization initiatives. And some others are on wait and see mode and decide to freeze hiring for now. Next slide. So just to update, a month after we did the survey, we did a quick check on the business condition and found that several industries have been badly impacted at this point of time. Travel, airline, hotel industries are declining by more than 40%. Retail industry, due to malls are closing their operations, they are impacted by around 30%. And then F&B industry, no dining allowed nowadays, so impacted by around 26%. And lastly, on e-commerce industry, we see that there's a decline by around 20% as many people nowadays are more conservative in their spending. Next slide. Okay. With this current condition, we identified 3 main key initiatives that organizations are taking currently, which will be explained further by Pak Sylvano. Pak Sil, over to you.
Thank you, Amanda. Not many businesses have margin around 25% and above. So if you see the previous page where some of these industries indicated that they will have or experience downturn of 20 to 40%, that definitely will hit the bottom line, which means that some element or major elements of cost have to be taken into consideration, if not, has to be cut. So one of the things here is the reality that we are facing, how to optimize costs. And I won't dwell you with the slides because I believe the slides have been sent to you. But one of the questions here is really how much cost can we carry to allow most minimum revenue that can be generated in the business? Because anywhere beyond that, that will hit the profit margin. So there are some quick wins or quick actions that can be done, like for example, cutting or minimizing vendors' costs, cutting off contractors, trying to do as much as possible in-house rather than using external help. Then there could be a second wave. It can also depend. It is also depending on how deep do you have to cut, because in some industries, like in the financial sector, almost 40% to 50% of the operating cost or the cost to the business is around people cost. But in manufacturing, probably it's much less than that. So it really depends on how much cost that you have to cut. I'm sure you've heard about the furlough and everything. Anything related to compensation can be cut. And Chris, there was a question around that. And the caveat is, as long as it is agreed by the employees or representative of the employees. So the question was right. However, if you look at the message from the government, it is encouraged that we should save as much jobs as possible, but the reality is you can't. So there was another question also whether there are some different practices within the private sector and the state-owned enterprise, which Amanda can share later on. But these are some of the cuts that can be done either quick, medium term, or probably slightly long term. Because if anybody can guess how long this crisis can be, the second question is how long does it take for us to bounce back beyond the crisis? So it's anywhere between 2 months to 18 months where we can do the cost cutting and recover from that. So that's the first thing, which is the cost optimization. The second thing here is what we call the sales sustainability. It's not about trying to maximize sales at the moment, because the reality is if all the businesses reports decline, how can we increase sales? But even with that reality, probably it's a good time to get closer to our customers. So it's around customer intimacy. It's about how do we reconstruct the sales compensation, like Amanda said. And then use different channels of marketing or go to market. Like, for example, if we have and underutilize our e-marketing, for example, that could be one of the things that we can optimize further. So sales sustainability is really what are the things that we can do now during the crisis in order to leverage our strength beyond the crisis so we can bounce back fast. And I recall, and some of the people around the call, if you all recall some of the crises that we've gone through, either GFC or the Chrismon in 98-2000, some of the companies that survive better after those crises are the ones who took the advantage of getting closer to the customers during the crisis. So it can be just calling up your key clients, emphasizing more on client relationship programs and so on. So that's all around the sales sustainability. The third aspect here is what we call maintaining organization resilience. Crisis always filters the best and the better and the rest, I would say. It's like the analogy of war. There's always winners and losers. So any kind of crisis will filter people who have stronger ability or agility or persistence to move on versus the rest. So what we're saying here is, even though as hard as it may sound, but we may want to take the opportunity of this crisis to actually develop our talent faster, but not in the traditional way we develop talents through classroom training, through programs or what have you. But this is where you can develop the talent through real active learning or action learning programs. Guasti, if you don't mind pushing to the next slide, please. Just want to show you all the way to page 21. You can read the slides all between here, but this is the proposition that we are pushing through, that the best time to fast develop our future leaders is during crisis. If you have not identified them, use a crisis to filter those who you can believe are potential for your future leaders. And because you know, you can feel, you can see the way they think, the way they behave is can slightly different from the rest. So how this can be done? But before we go to that, Guasti, if you go to the next page, please. Yeah, the premise is this. In terms of developing people, there has been research, and people, I think people around the call would have probably seen this, the 70-20-10. The argument here is, rather than putting people into classroom training, which is only about 10% of impact that can give to the individual, it's probably better to put them into experience, action learning on the job, which represents 70% of the impact. So putting them on assignments, really. And the second premise is people learn best when they are pressed, when they are compressed. What can be better if you look at compressed situation other than crisis? So many companies that I've seen in GFC, and also this is what we're suggesting now, is put those key talent into assignment to understand or to help the board solving some questions. On the right hand, there is some probably questions or must-win battles that each companies may have differently. So, for example, if one of the issues that we're facing today is what are the areas that we can cut, well, what kind of cost that we can cut without amputating ourselves, of course, the senior leaders can come up with a solution, but why not take the opportunity to ask these potential or future leaders of yours to think about it, recommend to the senior management, to the leadership, so you can see how aligned they are with you. And even better, if you have the opportunity to once approve, you can also ask them to help implement. See, there's a twofold advantage of doing that. First is you separate the best or the better against the rest, but second is you are creating a path for them to become your successors or whoever's successors in the future. So that was our thinking of the three thrusts that we see. The cost optimization is a must do. We have to do it. The only caveat there is what the cost and how long does it take to recover. Second is sales or customer intimacy. Let's focus on getting into the customer, even though they may not create immediate revenue, but at least you have a closer intimacy with the customer. And of course, the conversion of the fixed compensation towards performance variable sales incentive with content, obviously. And the third one is really how to fast develop your talent, or if you have not identified your talent, is to use this crisis, quote unquote, as a way to identify your future leaders through programs like that. So that's real business issues that you can be helped with by your future talent, and that also allow the future talent to be given the task bigger than their parent today. So that's how people learn. So I think that's the proposition that we are thinking, something that we can think further. Chris, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sylvano. A number of points raised there, and we're going to focus on these issues of human capital regarding human resource as an asset, not a liability at this time. You obviously have reflected in the Indonesian context. What I'd now like to do is to invite Stephen, first of all, wearing his Accenture hat, as somebody that communicates with the ASEAN, the wider ASEAN community, and also in contact with other developed countries as well, to just share with us a little bit of scene setting on what you sense is the climate at the moment as it relates to the human resource angle of this crisis.
Sure. Thanks, Chris, and also thanks BritCham Indonesia for inviting me. Also, thanks for the birthday wishes. It's always great to spend a few days after here. But this is going to be my first time speaking at a BritCham webinar series, which is always a great initiative to keep all of us kind of connected. As Chris introduced, I'm Stephen Marcelino. I'm the ASEAN Capital Market Lead at Accenture London headquarters. We have extensively worked with Southeast Asian financial services regulators around how they can mobilize and attracting investment and funding to accelerate infrastructure development, as well as working with global and regional financial services firms in order to capitalize opportunities within the industries in the UK and ASEAN. For those who are not aware, Accenture is a global professional services firms. We're a Fortune 500 companies with over 500,000 employees, serving clients at more than 120 clients around the world. In ASEAN, we operate at 5 out of 10 markets, including our operations in Indonesia and our Jakarta office. As Chris also mentioned earlier, I'm also leading GIPA, Global Indonesia Professionals Association, which aims to promote business and investment links overseas through highly talented professionals and executives across G20 and ASEAN. So I'm privileged to receive quite a lot of G20 intel and ASEAN intel as well, with both of my Accenture and GIPA hat. Now back to COVID. I mean, COVID-19 truly is a humanitarian and societal crisis of unprecedented scale and speed, something that Amanda touched on earlier with a lot of fast-moving variables. It certainly has some more immediate impacts and longer-term impacts. And allow me, in my response to a very comprehensive thinking and thought leadership that Korn Ferry produced, to speak briefly on the immediate impacts of the workforce in various organizations and firms, as well as in the more longer terms that I'll be spending a little bit more time on. So firstly, for more immediate impacts, Accenture absolutely see a lot of companies doing the cost optimizations that Sylvano mentioned, whether the multinational companies as well as local firms. Now, globally, we've seen layoffs has surged in a rate that we haven't seen since the global financial crisis, or GFC, right? Accenture estimates that about 1 in every 3 G7 jobs, so about a third of jobs in G7 are vulnerable. So they're not necessarily being laid off yet, but they are prone, they are at risk for potential furlough or temporary leave here, or redundancies. In the US, for example, there has been about 10 million Americans claim unemployment benefits. So that gives us an indication there are 10 million. This is unprecedented. Certainly for the world's largest economy, this is the first time we've seen in our lifetime. In France, there are over 4 million. In the UK, there are about 1 million. And the number may grow, right? Now, in Indonesia case, ADB predicts that about 4 of every 5 Indonesians are vulnerable, according to their latest report. Now, I don't have the numbers in Indonesia yet, because it's not a number that's readily available, but that's just give you an estimate that everyone's impacted. Now, what Accenture has done early in the week after the long weekend, we launched a People Plus Work Connect. It's a free online platform that connects employer to employer. There are groups of companies that are, can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, perfect. All right, just want to make sure that everyone can hear me okay, because there are some chats going on there. Right, there are some group of companies that are reducing their workforce, and there are other companies that are cannot find enough people to fill in jobs, in particular in the pharmaceutical companies, in healthcare, in some of manufacturing companies that are trying to produce some healthcare equipment. So these People Plus Work Connect platform trying to bring these two groups together and ensure we can get people back to work faster. And I believe Asti has the link that can be shared in the chat box, perhaps for everyone to take a look. This is a rather new global initiative, and thanks to our global partners, our founding partners, Verizon, ServiceNow, and Lincoln Financial Group, we're hoping to take this to more G7 and even emerging markets countries as well. Now, into my second point around the longer term, especially around looking beyond crisis, I absolutely agree to Sylvano's point around bounce back. And even more important, that a lot of employees and even organizations should be thinking about what's beyond crisis, what's that bounce back looking like today. Now, there are a number of sub-points there. Mainly, I'm going to deep dive a little bit on the bounce back and what's coming as the virtual decade. On the bounce back, a little bit of stats. The IMF recently published that the great lockdown crisis may bring the world economy to the recession, about estimate -3% of global GDP growth, and it may bounce back in 2021 based on the V-shaped curve economic forecast back to about 5.8%, which is quite encouraging. That bounce back are in the near future. There is light in the end of the tunnel. In the Southeast Asia, in the ASEAN case, in a separate report, ADB published that ASEAN may likely to grow at only 1%, one of the slowest pace in our lifetime at 1%. But it all means we just managed to avoid recession in ASEAN, which is also encouraging. And in 2021, ASEAN predicts this to bounce back at about 6% growth. Now, the question here to a lot of organizations, how do they be ready to seize the opportunity in the post-COVID-19 world? And how can they mobilize the right people in order to seize that opportunities? What sort of talents and skills required in order to be doing that from today? Because again, these are not something that they could just do overnight. Mindful that some of potential competitors may go bust, may go default in the whole process. Right? And around this bounce back in the workforce element as well, the question remains exists: how can companies and leadership rebuild level of confidence and level of trust with employees? Because obviously, when you postpone promotion and you do not, you perhaps reduce the amount of pay or salary, there's always impact on morale, and that's what we have seen and witnessed in some of our professional members, in some of our thriving hubs in the UK and the US. I'm happy to share that kind of more bottom-up view later on. But that's kind of the first part around bounce back. Now, moving on to the virtual decade, as much as this is a really bad crisis, COVID-19 has allowed the world to see one of the best catalysts for innovation, digital and elastic, flexible work arrangement. Right? What does a decade actually looking like? We believe there will be a completely new human experience in an already fast-growing digital economy in the next decade. Now, how can businesses and firms seizing this opportunity to create a truly elastic workforce from today, so that by the end of the decade 2030 they may no longer in the S&P 500, or they may no longer listed in IDX again, right? And another more micro level around what businesses and organizations should be thinking about: how can they nurture collaborations, sense of purpose, and collective productivity when we see us going to see a lot more remote and virtual working? And importantly, do we need to pivot our mindset from capacity-based, how many hours a day you are in Zoom or in Skype, into more results or outcome-based deliverables instead of capacity? How busy are you on a particular day? Digital is also cross-cutting in every industry already, but again, COVID-19 really put a catalyst on it. The online transactions are actually surging all around G7, and I also believe in Indonesia. We still, last time I was in Indonesia for about a couple of weeks in March, certainly see Gojek and Grab everywhere as well. So I'm sure a lot of people locked down, they can't really be doing much beside, I'm sure, consuming a lot of martabak manis. Now, I've spoken around in the longer term horizon. I've mentioned about the people and various businesses. How about the governments? Because we at Accenture also believe that this is also applicable to government. In the longer term horizon, just looking into Indonesia government perspective, we are also pleased that Joko Widodo second term has pledged that they'll be focusing on human capital development. This is a great pledge. We know COVID-19 has given some setback into a number of priorities, including human capital development. However, as Indonesia providing a number of fiscal stimulus and fiscal reliefs to businesses and SMEs, it would be really good for Indonesia government to consider potential stimulus to individuals, professionals who may be impacted by this crisis. Some use case, for example, in UK and France, some of those employees that are being furloughed actually covered proportionately by the government. UK specifically covered up to £2,500 a month, or about 80% of working salary per month, up to 3 months. Now, I mean, obviously, there are some delays we've been hearing. So again, being critical that it's not all smooth sailing, but we have seen a number of governments intending to cover and protecting at an individual level beyond the precious businesses and SMEs that very much need to be protected. Again, kind of today, governments can also be encouraging and directing people in furloughed or who have been laid off to do a bit of reskilling, upskilling, and particularly obtaining some of on-demand skills that are relevant at digital economy. As simple as perhaps promoting products or services in social media, creating websites, things that everyone at all ages should be able to learn. Now, that's kind of, so I've shared my perspective in a short term and in a long term impacts on the workforce in various organizations and firms. and pleased to share this perspective. Chris, over to you. I believe I've covered most, I suppose.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Stephen. Just by way of bringing a few points to a close, we started off by Sylvano suggesting that that the BritCham title was a little bit antagonistic, maybe, to cull or to nurture. But I think what's come out of this discussion very, very clearly is that all businesses need to consider all members of their workforce at all levels as assets, and therefore give very, very careful consideration as to what they do in particular at times like this, but even not at times like this, how they develop, how they reposition, how they consider opportunities such as, Stephen, you've mentioned the automation and use of AI as well. This very clearly is not a debate that is going to end when we all come out of this virus crisis condition. In fact, probably the discussion is just beginning as we do approach what both of you have described as a very interesting, very challenging, but also very exciting decade ahead into the redeployment of assets and their development. From a BritCham point of view, just to let everybody who is watching or joined us now, on May the 6th, we have a webinar which will be looking at the leadership and the need for resilience and adaptability, and offering some solutions for the development in that regard. So please do join us. It's in some ways a follow-on. One or two people have written in asking about how to find digital options for human resource development, particularly at times like now, where people perhaps have time at different times working from home. Please do address these questions either to myself or my team, and we'll be happy to redirect you to members within BritCham that offer a whole range of human resource development options, in particular through various and digital platforms. Also, there has been another question largely addressed by Sylvano relating to legislation for laying people off or furloughing and so on. Sylvano did suggest that actually, provided it's by mutual agreement, that supersedes regulations. There are a number of interpretations as to what the national situation of crisis mode is and what it can mean in terms of manpower regulations. We put out English translations on our website and also include them in our snapshots. If there are questions that you have that are not addressed through the official channels and you'd like to create some sort of chat, then we'd be very happy to do that for you. Finally, I'd just like to indulge Stephen and I by sharing or reminding people exactly what the relationship is between BritCham and GIPA, which is the UK-based and also the wider GIPA. So for BritCham's premier members, they are able to go into the BritCham website in a portal that is password protected, and in there you will find up to a couple of hundred CVs of Indonesian top talent that are in their final year of undergraduate or postgraduate and looking to be positioned largely in Indonesia in some sort of progressive first job career mode. Those premier members can go in and have a look and engage this returning talent before it hits the wider jobs marketplace and develop your own relationships with them. And with that in mind, just advance warning that BritCham is developing its own BritCham Education Centre, which will be seeking to marry up the qualifications needs going forward of our members, with Indonesians that are wanting to go to the UK to select appropriate qualifications to study because they intend to come back and want to have their first job or their apprenticeship or their internship with one of the BritCham members. So there's a lot going on from a developmental point of view as well. I'm very pleased to see that those people on board today have come from a range of organizations, from SOEs, from larger international blue chips, from domestic blue chip companies as well, and also smaller and medium sized companies. So right across the range, this challenge and discussion of human capital, or how best to deploy and develop human assets, is definitely very, very topical, and we will take this as the first stage in developing the debate. You will all get, if you haven't already, you will all get a copy of the Korn Ferry survey output. So at that point, I'd like to thank very much Sylvano for joining us. Very, very ably assisted going through the slides by Amanda. Thank you, Amanda. And to Stephen, sharing insights from the wider and more global interpretation of what's going on from his Accenture hat, and also as chair of the Global Indonesian Professionals Association. We thank you very much for joining us. If you're a non-member of BritCham, when we're starting to get out of the other side of the coronavirus crisis, for sure my team will be in touch with you and trying to impress upon you the value proposition of membership of the British Chamber of Commerce in Indonesia. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Sylvano. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, everybody that's given up an hour of your time to join this debate.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks all.
Thank you, Steve.